Live everywhere.
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, October 3rd, 2018. Or, hey, maybe it's not. I don't know. Let's say it's fantastic o'clock on the best day ever. 2,100 million. I'm a bazillionaire. We can say whatever we want. It doesn't matter. No reason to tell the truth about anything. LOL, YOLO, nothing matters. Yes, it's another day like that. Kavanaugh still in the news. Nothing he says matters. FBI allegedly wrapping up its investigation a couple of days early. Well, quite frankly, in all fairness, I wrapped up my investigation a few days early. Kavanaugh did it. And that's all I've got. That's all I have to say about that. I don't know what the FBI is up to exactly. And, well, I don't know. This will tell us something, maybe, about where they stand. I guess depending on which field offices were involved in the investigation. And we're eventually going to have an investigation about the investigation as well, which is always a good thing and probably part of Trump's plan for delegitimizing the whole thing. Plenty to talk about today besides Kavanaugh, if you can believe it. However, there is yet more, and we will be commenting on that, and we'll be making room for Greg Dworkin and Joan McCarter to comment as well. I don't think there's anything going on in Congress today that necessarily would distract her during the morning hours. Fingers crossed for that one. And let's go. We're ready to take off on another incredible day of Trump administration watching. Daily Kos Radio is live now. Bill told us this all the way from Portland, Maine. And you know, it's getting dark earlier up there in Portland, Maine. So I don't know. And it stays dark later, too. What's the weather like up there? Is it chill in the air? I don't know. Daily Kos Radio is live now, he says, by way of warming things up for the morning. Kagro X, that's me, David Waldman, joined today by our own Dem from Connecticut, if you follow him on Twitter, Greg Dworkin, plus Joan McCarter with the ever mysterious and indecipherable Twitter handle of Joan McCarter, in case you were having difficulty finding her on Twitter. Sadly, we learn today from Bill, Squee, El Fartmeister, and FFFFFF won't be able to make it today. Yeah, Kavanaugh still in the news. Yesterday, somehow, I don't know the mechanics of this. I saw some things in passing, but I'm not certain that they were accurate. I don't know how this thing came to light, but somehow, somewhere along the line, the press got a hold of another amazing artifact from the Kavanaugh's attic, I guess. I don't know what happened, but somehow somebody preserved a handwritten letter that Brett Kavanaugh, who by the way signs the letter Bart, i.e. Bart O. Kavanaugh, like he's such a genius, this guy. We thought he had hidden his name from everybody, or Mark Judge thought he had shielded him from liability in his stupid book by calling him Bart O. Kavanaugh. But apparently they called him Bart right then in those days. This wasn't necessarily something we can blame on Mark Judge here. But somebody saved, which is a stupid idea, and then somebody revealed, which I guess is also a stupid idea, this handwritten letter from Brett Kavanaugh to his buddies prior to Beach Week, at least one of the years. I guess this is the 1983 version of Beach Week, explaining to them the mechanics of how they would take possession of the rental apartment that they had gotten for themselves in Ocean City, Maryland for the week. And it's incredible what this guy saves. And it's incredible what stupid things this guy was willing to say in print and then save. I mean, I don't think at the time that there's any way he could have anticipated this happening. It's just such a dumb letter. The New York Times has got it. I think I saw somewhere in there, not in the New York Times piece, but somewhere out there on Twitter, that maybe he actually discovered and released this letter to friendly news outlets. And I think he may have given it to the Federalist, which is not really news and also not very surprising, because he and the Federalists both thought this letter was somehow exculpatory, and I'm not sure why they thought that, if that's even the case. At any rate, it got into the hands of the New York Times, and they were willing to look at it in a different light, and it's not particularly exculpatory, although I do still marvel at the Times' willingness to take Kavanaugh and others on his team at their word about things that are pretty stupid and pretty obviously lies, and he carries them further than anybody ever could have imagined. I don't really understand why they agreed to do this. The New York Times piece is running under the headline of Kavanaugh's 1983 letter offers inside look at high school clique. Kate Kelly and David Enrich have this piece. Do we go into it? Do we read the whole thing? I guess the upshot of it, in case we don't actually read through the whole thing, is for all the disavowals of his drinking habits that he offered, and then sort of backtracked into, well, I had a few beers in college, and maybe I had a few too many. The letter is, and we get to use the word contemporaneous again, a contemporaneous record of how he viewed his drinking then, when he was, of course, underage, and how he viewed his friends drinking, and how he thought his friends viewed it all. And like the yearbook, it's chock full of references to their vast overindulgence in alcohol. Not anything like every once in a while I had a few too many. In fact, one of the passages in the letter suggests that whoever gets there first ought to warn the neighbors that they are loud, obnoxious drunks and prolific pukers, which at least is fair warning. We'll give him that. He's being, I guess you could call that being considerate of the neighbors. I mean, a better way would be don't vomit on them, but I guess if you're going to, you might as well warn them that that's the case. And then, of course, he pulls another one of their stupid tricks in one, signing the letter Bart, which is like, okay, that gives away half the game. And two, signing it off with that reference to that bunch of capital F's again that appear all over their yearbook, which if you're an enterprising sort and decided to look up in the darker corners of the internet, what might that mean? You would probably find out that it doesn't mean, and has never been taken to mean, what Kavanaugh told the Senate committee it meant, was that they were making fun of one of their friends who allegedly, when he got drunk, would stammer on words that began with the letter F and then would say f, and then finally spit out that word that starts with the letter F. And it could be any number of words that start with the letter F, but he meant for us to use our imagination on that. But he signs the letter F. There's 5 of them here. Bart, which, like, I guess I just wonder, and the Times repeats his story uncritically, despite the fact that there's, records out there of what that actually was referring to. And I'm curious that they didn't have any questions about what word was it that Kavanaugh was trying to make fun of his friend stammering out. It's clearly something that begins with F, but we never get to it. It's F, followed by no other letters whatsoever. And so he's clearly trying to spit out a word that has no letters in it, and then just Bart. So, I mean, I don't know why they're so credulous with this, but hey, it's the New York Times. They can't get it all right in a single article. There has to be something in there. Well, that's not the only article they were garnering notice for yesterday, and I have a feeling we'll discuss at least one other one. Greg Dworkin is here. You can take your pick, Greg. What direction would you like?
Or a couple of other ones. I have to tell you this. I've been reading. I keep rereading and laughing about this tweet from the Discourse Lover, which says, the Kavanaugh stuff is incredibly grim and dark, but I do get some small pleasure out of reading sentences like J. Alfred Waspington, now a partner at Aryan Thorpe and Associates, has identified himself as the boy known as El Fartmeister in Mr. Kavanaugh's diary. And that's about how that Time story reads.
Yeah, pretty much. That's they were goofy kids, et cetera, but the point is that there's, again, contemporaneous writing in his own hand that corroborates almost everything that people thought about his yearbook entry, but which he lied about instead. That's that.
Well, also a reminder, depending upon the age of the listener,
I am 100.
the very popular in its day black and white Western Maverick had two brothers, Bart and Brett. And so whenever you see that, it's an automatic reference. But if you're perhaps younger than that, maybe it doesn't automatically occur to you.
Yes, their claim was that a teacher, in calling the role, accidentally called him Bart rather than Brett. Couldn't manage
That's why.
Brett.
Everybody in that era knew exactly what that meant.
That could be it, but he didn't.
That may be where it's from.
Yeah, for the
But
teacher.
if one person says Bart and the other says Brett, and you say, well, that has no relation to each other, that can't possibly be me,
Well, no.
you just roll your eyes and say, right, okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't really care why he decided to settle on that. It was just a matter of he appeared to be denying that he was Bart.
No, it's just an obvious one.
Yes.
Of course, that's what they're going to.
No, it's
Anyway.
not me.
So you have all of that.
Yes.
And, what Robert McFarlane has a lovely picture of a hazy landscape and says, the word of the day is scumbled. S-C-U-M-B-L-E-D, scumbled. Of a sky landscape view, person, or painting, softened in hue, hazed over, rendered less hard-edged and emphatic. To scumble is to blur, to mist up. And that's basically what Kavanaugh's trying to do about his testimony.
Oh, okay. Well,
And so I think
got
it's
the scum
a
part,
good word.
right?
But we still get to the same place. All the experts are claiming to know exactly what's going to happen next, like Mitch McConnell.
Yes.
The FBI winds up finishing its report last night or today, giving senators, and senators only until it leaks, 1 day to read the FBI report, and then there's a vote on Friday. Whether it's a procedural vote or an actual vote has not been made clear by McConnell. I guess it depends upon the results of the vote. I'm thinking if he's losing, it's going to be procedural.
I guess.
And if you think he wins, it'll be irregular.
I don't know how that would be.
The point being there that the White House is driving McConnell to take this to a vote on the floor whether he wins or loses because he has to. You can't withdraw anymore. In like a normal world, you'd withdraw the nomination because you don't have the votes, and then you'd put up somebody else. But that can't happen anymore. Everybody has been so pushed into battle lines that it's going to have to come to a floor vote. And the thing is, I don't think McConnell knows what the results of that vote is, because I still think the three amigos there, Flake, who's kind of appalled at making fun of Dr. Blasey Ford in front of a Mississippi rally last night by Trump, and Murkowski and Collins cannot be thrilled about how all of this is going. The FBI investigation has clearly been limited. That's not what they asked for. Trump is being a jerk, and that's not what they hoped for. And they're getting incredible pressure from home. Collins, for example, the two main papers, the main papers in Maine, the big papers in Maine, have come out against. And Murkowski is running against all sorts of opposition to Kavanaugh at home from Native Americans. And Flake is kind of appalled. So when you put it all together, I'm not saying that means that they vote against him or for him. It's that we truly don't know what those three are going to do. And chances are, whatever they do, Heitkamp and Manchin will go along with. And we really don't know how this is going to turn out.
Yeah,
even though the experts are telling you they do. It's obvious this is all a sham, and they need cover so that they could vote yes. Actually, it could all be a sham, and it's cover for them to vote no. We don't know what they're going to do.
Yeah, and it may even be a sham and cover for Collins and or
contender.
The rest of them to Flake and Collins and Murkowski to vote no, and then a cue there for Heitkamp and Manchin to say, all right, well, that's 3 no's, so I'll vote yes, and try and duck it.
If it goes down, one of them or both of them may have the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, that is true. So despite
it's very hard. If it's the actual deciding vote, it's hard for me to see Manchin voting yes.
That could be so.
But if it's one less than the deciding vote to make him look good,
forget
no-brainer.
it. Right. If it doesn't make a difference, anything could happen.
And you know who's really good at counting votes like that and making it happen?
I do
Nancy
not.
Pelosi.
Oh, well, she's in the wrong place.
We'll see how good McConnell is at it.
Fine, put her in the Senate. I mean, I guess that would be okay.
That would be fine with me. Or you can make her, speaker, and then when the other guys get thrown in jail, then she can be president.
Okay.
The thing is, people were tweeting all sorts of fun things on Twitter. They always do. Sometimes this gets to be so much that you start, playing games. And one game was, I guess, the national, the Oscar people, the Academy, asked, tell us your favorite film in 5 words.
Okay.
And so far, the most popular entry is Donald Trump dies in jail.
Hey,
now,
wait a minute, that's not even a movie.
But, after watching the rally last night a little bit, I don't know. I could see why that would be a popular movie. So we have all of these moving parts. Nobody really knows what's going on. That leads a vacuum. And in a vacuum, of course, all the pundits who think they know what's going on are going to talk. And frankly, unless you're the expert who said that this is what's going to happen with Jeff Flake last Friday, I don't think you have much standing to talk.
Oh, am I that person? I cannot remember.
Well, neither can I. I have these blackouts. So the thing is, again, that, just watch and see what happens and let it play out. Here's a funny one. Matthew Daly reporting on Twitter. Murkowski appears in no hurry, even as McConnell pledges to move forward with Kavanaugh vote this week. He talked about a vote last week, too, she told the AP. Collins, riding with Murkowski on the Senate subway, smiled and said, good answer.
That's true. And it is a good
As Jennifer Bendery describes the same scene in her own words,
yes.
Murkowski and Collins driving the Cav train. Damn, it feels good to be a gangsta, laughed Murkowski as the subway doors closed.
All right.
So this is the week.
Collins, though. Okay, yeah.
But this is the week Collins, Murkowski, and Flake get to decide everything, and everybody's, paying fealty to them.
Okay.
Right? Jeff Flake has the litter, the Senate litter, and he's got Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell being the bearers, and he's in the litter, and he's having Bob Corker throw rose petals in front of him, and that's going to be for a week. After that, they won't talk to him. But for now, these guys are driving the process, not the pundits.
Okay, rose petals even. Okay.
So there's that. Peyton Place on the Potomac, I called it this morning when I put together the punch roundup.
Ah.
And, of course, we know they're worried because there's all sorts of dark money going, not so dark, dark money going into judicial crisis and then judicial crisis putting it, so that's not dark. We know who's paying for those. But we have all those ads on cable now. Greg Sargent writes it up. Note the message in the ads. This is from the Pundit Roundup. They show footage of Kavanaugh describing the process as search and destroy. A narrator, and of course with dark, creepy music, says liberals are trying to ruin a good man with smears, intoning that Kavanaugh fought back, clearing his name, defending his honor, and calling on Democrats to stand with President Trump against the liberal smear merchants. In other words, at the core of the final push to save Kavanaugh, and they do have to save him because his nomination is in big trouble, it's not a done deal, is the idea that the real stakes in this affair turn on whether the destruction of a good man will be legitimized. If Kavanaugh is not confirmed, we will have destroyed him, and that would be terribly unjust. But what this argument really means, inescapably, is that Ford's claim should never have gotten the examination they're getting. Graham is claiming the whole process has been deeply unfair, and the ads in his behalf claim that Democrats are trying to ruin him with smears. What they're really doing is insisting on a fuller inquiry than the Republicans wanted, says Greg Sargent. And that's what the Republicans don't want, and that's been true and obvious every step of the way. Don't look at this, don't look at that. That means that we think that they knew about this stuff, and they pushed it anyway.
Well, that's true. I've been somewhat astonished at the pushback that you get from certain quarters about, they love to go to the proverb of let he who is without sin cast the first stone. This is by way of pushing us off of criticizing or inquiring about Kavanaugh's past, no matter how distant, I guess. And just a reminder to everybody that this is what the job interview is all about here. We keep saying this is a job interview. The job he's interviewing for is stonecaster, one of 9 people that we hand the stones to and allow them to cast the first ones. Yeah. That's what this is. So it's rather ironic to bring up this proverb about the dangers and the warnings of be careful who you hand stones over to. And then,
Because
of
it's
course,
true.
yeah, the first thing he does is the first person who says, well, now, wait a second. You want the stone, but are you without sin? Which he then answers with, how dare you cast stones at me? And then everybody starts throwing stones at the people who say, wait a second, you don't meet the qualifications. Hold on.
I see it much simpler than that. You want to elect him stonecaster, you give him the first stone, and the first words out of his mouth is, who's the Democrat? And then he throws it.
Right. Well, thanks very much. We really appreciate that, too. Yeah, that's a pretty large problem. And even even Kavanaugh's initial supporters are expressing a lot of doubt about that.
They are, and I think that's important. Let me give you some examples there. My favorite, and the person that liberals hate the most and love to hate is Benjamin Wittes. He writes in The Atlantic, I know Brett Kavanaugh, but I wouldn't confirm him. This is an article I never imagined myself writing, that I never wanted to write, that I wish I could not write. If I were a senator, I would not vote to confirm Brett Kavanaugh. I write with no pleasure, but with deep sadness, yada, yada. Getting past the sadness and all that, and the fact that his credentials are solid because he supported Kavanaugh and spoke to his character, and he's admired him, and this and that. If I were a senator, I'd vote against Kavanaugh's confirmation. I'd do it both because of Ford's testimony and because of Kavanaugh's. For reasons I will describe, I find her account more believable than his. I also would do it because of whatever the truth of what happened in the summer of 1982, Thursday's hearing left Kavanaugh non-viable as a justice. As Charlie Sykes, a thoughtful conservative commentator sympathetic to Kavanaugh, put it in the Weekly Standard podcast on Friday, even if you support Brett Kavanaugh, or is it Bart Kavanaugh, I'm not sure, that was breathtaking as an abandonment of any pretense of having a judicial temperament, just the stuff David was talking about.
Yep.
Sykes went on, it's possible, I think, to have been angry, emotional, and passionate without crossing the line that he crossed, assuming there are any lines anymore. And then that was Sykes, and with his ads, Kavanaugh blew cross lines I believe a justice still needs to hold. And he goes into more detail about how he made his decision, but he can't do it. And I think that's right. Yahoo has a story about how the bar fights back at Kavanaugh. And it's a whole bunch of people who, some of which were clerks and others, who have pulled back on their support and said, I supported him initially, but after seeing what I'm seeing, I can't do this anymore. For example, Jennifer Bender tweets in related news, 3 former Kavanaugh clerks who previously said he was great just wrote to the Judiciary Committee to clarify they're deeply troubled by the allegations against him, not just the classmates. Mimi Rocha, who is a MSNBC frequent guest to talk about legal issues as a former prosecutor in the Southern District of New York. I think that's your qualifications for getting on TV. I quoted in this interesting look at why members of the legal profession are backing away from support of Kavanaugh, and that's in the Yahoo piece. And I hear privately from people at relatively large law firms that normally are silent about it. The tide is turning against him from those folks. They have influence because they talk to people quietly. And again, it's not that they're more important than us or somehow or other they outnumber the people at the Trump rallies. They don't. But they have their ways of conveying information. And so, that's why I think the whole thing's up in the air, and I really don't know which way it's going to go.
Well, we'll have to wait and see. I'm not certain. I've been thinking about what you were saying about whether or not there would be a procedural vote or a substantive vote on Kavanaugh this week. Yeah, and I don't see anything that would indicate that it could be anything other than a procedural vote. I mean, there has to be at least one procedural vote beforehand, and even its successful passage would only trigger the 30-hour post-cloture period. I have a very difficult time believing they're going to get to a vote on confirmation if they're going to start voting on Friday.
No, the original plan was procedural Friday and then vote over the weekend.
I
don't know what the weekend means.
I guess they do it very early Friday.
McConnell was specifically asked about that, and he wouldn't answer what the actual plan was.
Yeah. Okay. So, I guess what that is supposed to mean is a cloture vote on Friday, and if they don't get it, then nothing. And then if they do get it, Saturday evening, they can make 30 hours run between Friday morning and Saturday afternoon. Okay. But, Friday I don't see it. can't be substantive unless everybody jumps out of the way for some reason.
Anyway,
Okay. Yes.
so once again, the other side of that, though, is that the procedural vote and the actual vote are different. I point to John McCain and what he did on the Affordable Care Act, where he voted yes, then no.
Yes, that's true, too.
And you don't know what Flake is going to do because he voted yes to get it out of committee, and he may vote to send it to the floor and then vote no. You just can't tell. So the whole thing is like, you have to wait till the end till you really know what's going on, which is too bad because sometimes you'd like to, marshal your outrage early.
Yes,
or
well, all you can do is prepare yourself.
Mentally for what happens if you lose, and you can't because you really don't know what's going to happen.
That's why we should all start casting stones, I think. This is what the upshot of that proverb is.
Well, casting
I'm not sure.
votes.
I wasn't really paying attention, the thing is. But I like stones.
Right, because we only have 5 weeks left, and then we get to cast votes.
Ah, right. Yeah, so you might as well start casting the stones before you get busy with votes. You don't want to clutter your schedule. Even if you keep a good calendar.
Right, and we do. There's now online countdown to election stuff you can look at and see how many hours, how many seconds, just like CNN.
Okay. Yeah, when are they going to start doing that?
I don't know.
Is there a countdown to that?
There's a countdown to that, right?
There should be. All right. Well, we're coming up on our first break here, and we
After
haven't
the
even
break,
talked
we're going
about
to hit the big New York Times story about Trump's phony finances
There
and the
is
fact
one.
that he's a tax fraud.
Okay. Well, the failing
As
New
well
York
as every other
Times, something. Yeah, I mean, I guess he's been preparing his minions for this day for a long time. I guess this is what all of the fake news and failing New York Times and their bias against me has all been aimed at. He must have guessed that they were going to come out with this story eventually. I am surprised
They've
they're
been working
both
on it
from
for 19 months.
Yeah, but I mean, they've had 35, 40 years. We all knew what Donald Trump was way back when, and they were in New York the whole time, the New York Times. I'm not certain why they didn't pay attention. I believe they thought it was beneath them. All right, we'll be back after 2 minutes to discuss that. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Greg Dworkin is still with me. I'm David Waldman, your host for the Kagro in the Morning Show. And it turns out that the New York Times has, belatedly woken up to the fact that one of the central figures in the drama that is New York over the past 4 decades, that there's something newsworthy about this man, and we ought to take a look at it. He's a fraud, and he stole all his money, and he's been robbing the troops since the day he was born. Thank you.
Right. It's really an incredible story with documentation and footnotes. To put it in perspective, a couple of things. First, there's this piece in the Washington Post. If you're wondering how Trump managed to evade the tax authorities for so long, given the Brazen X report in the New York Times, note that we've basically stopped prosecuting white-collar crime and tax evasion.
Yes. That's
important because, if you want to actually balance the budget, just go after white-collar crime.
Yeah, waste, fraud, and abuse, I was told, would balance the budget. And this is fraud and abuse.
Exactly, Catherine Rampell article. So David K. Johnson, and here his credentials, by the way, is that he used to be the tax reporter for the New York Times.
Oh,
he says, as the paper's former tax reporter and the journalist who has covered Trump the longest, at least the living journalist who has covered Trump the longest, I'm in a solid position to judge the depth and quality of the work. It is masterful.
Excellent.
The Times expose shows in vivid details egregious tax cheating, not chiseling here and there, but gigantic lies to escape lawful burdens. It's
Yes.
unprecedented in scope and precision. That's exactly what it is. And most, if not all, of the transactions detailed in the Times can be pursued as civil tax fraud by both the federal and New York state governments. Neither the feds nor the state have statutes of limitations on civil fraud. Generally, criminal fraud is 6 years. Statute of limitations, that is.
Yes.
So state tax authorities are checking it out. There's no love lost there with the new people. Here are some of the most revealing aspects of the 14,000-word main article.
Wow, that's a lot of work.
By reporters David Barstow, Suzanne Craig, and Russ Butner. 1. In details to transfer wealth from Fred Trump to his children, transfers subject to a 55% gift tax, the Trumps drastically undervalued the properties. When more than 1,000 apartment units and 8 buildings were transferred from Fred Trump to his children, no taxes are paid on 7 and a token sum on the 8th.
Well, there
And then
was
he
that
gives
eighth.
another, yeah. Sorry.
There was that eighth. Hey, he's not
Yeah,
evading all taxes. I mean, let he who is without sin cast the first something. Okay.
And then he gives an example of how you can game the system.
Don't do
right.
this. Yes.
Donald has condos in Manhattan, 1987, called Trump Palace.
Ooh, palace.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fred pays Donald $15.5 million for a stake in the condos.
And ketchup.
Then Fred says, they're worthless. And then he sells it for $10,000.
Yes. To who?
Fred gets a big tax loss. He gets the discount against his own taxes.
Right.
And Donald gets the $15.5 million.
Awesome.
So it's a disguised gift allowing the family to evade income and gift taxes.
Yes.
And the family told tax authorities that they were worth only about 6% of their actual value.
And tax
so they did
authorities
this
believe
a
them.
lot.
Yeah, this is some of the plans are rather ingenious in their.
Yeah, Fred was a genius for that.
Yeah.
Well, not so
in
much,
their
but Fred
design.
was really good at this.
Others of them are not ingenious. They are not new schemes. They are, in fact, old schemes that are described in the tax code as this scheme that somebody once thought because it's not in the tax code, it might be legal. It isn't legal, and if you do it, we'll arrest you. And they did it, and then they did not arrest them. That's basically what happened.
Right. So he used invoicing schemes, cheating poor tenants, manipulating the price of stocks, the usual stuff.
Yeah,
And while candidate Trump claimed to be worth more than $10 billion, as president, he filed a financial statement showing a net worth of $1.4 billion. That document used highly inflated values for many assets, and because of loopholes on reporting, it didn't list all the debts. So, as David Corn says, today would be a good day to release Donald Trump's taxes.
I don't know what I would have chosen this day, but I'll take it.
Well, after the New York Times report, I think it's a great day.
Okay. I mean, they're all great days. That's the thing about David Corn. He says that every day.
And we're doing that every day, but I thought it was especially humorous today.
Well, I'll consider that.
He could have signed it Bart Corn. That would have been funny. But what we need now are serious investigations by Congress, the IRS, and New York State and city tax authorities. Trump's sister, a senior judge on the federal Third Circuit Court of Appeals, should remove herself from the bench immediately. There's no circumstance in which it's good for America to have a tax cheat in the White House or on the federal bench. The interesting thing is, as many people have observed, you can get away with racism. There's a market for it. You can get away with misogyny. There's a market for that.
Yes.
You can get away with dumping on liberals or owning the libs. Certainly a market for that.
Yeah.
People actually do get annoyed if they think you're cheating on your taxes and they don't get to.
Some people do.
That is something that even
that makes him
conservatives
smart.
and rally voters get annoyed at.
Sometimes, until you reveal it was Donald Trump who did it, and then we'll see.
We'll see.
That was
I
the
think
line
that
in
one
the debates.
that's a slow burn.
Yeah.
But over time, I think it's going to make a big difference and a big deal.
So. That was a line in the debate that he was accused of exactly this, and he said, "No, that makes me smart."
Yeah. But
would
the
have
story
squandered
doesn't
it.
make him look so smart because, he got $400 million from his dad, and then he went to the casinos in Atlantic City and left with $8 billion worth of debt. And how smart is that?
That
He got
happens so
bailed
often.
out time after time after time after time
Yes.
because he blew the money he was given. That doesn't make him look smart.
Well, if you blow enough of it, you don't have to call Gamblers Anonymous. You can just call Deutsche Bank or Russians, and they'll help you.
Brett Kavanaugh.
Right, I guess so. None of these things are illegal anymore.
Right. So, all interesting.
Yes.
Interesting. And a lot of it still has to play out. How does it play out politically? Well, here's a piece from Ronald Brownstein. CNN, educated white women were already recoiling from Trump, then came Kavanaugh.
Oh, yes, true.
So there's a class gap. The difference between white non-educated, in meaning not non-college educated women, and women with a degree. Mm-hmm. Half of the white women without degree said they believe Kavanaugh and the Senate should confirm him. 61% of college-educated white women say they believe Ford, and 58% said the Senate should reject his nomination. So with the midterms coming up in just a few weeks and the suburbs being the dynamic, that's a big deal that's only going to get, I think, more positive. I don't see how this helps. I've heard all the yammering about how this is going to help Republicans by galvanizing them. It galvanizes the activists. But out there in the real world, people see Trump's rally and they see him denigrate Blasey Ford in front of people and guys behind him laughing and yucking it up when that happens. Mm-hmm. I don't see it.
Well, we did learn an awful lot about what that means to mock women for the benefit of the audience of men who are watching. There is that. Right. And then, of course, we're constantly lectured that the vast middle of our country feels very, very differently than those of us in our coastal bubbles. Apparently a huge pastime abusing women in the vast majority of the country, and something to be super proud of, I guess. Mississippi was really, I'm sure, thrilled to death to be represented that way. I wanted to say a few things about the place yesterday, and every time I pulled back from it, because I have such a judicial temperament, of course,
right,
and saying there's people there who are way pissed that this is happening at all, let alone in their own state, and bracing themselves for the online denigration of Mississippi. So I decided to spare them that from my corner anyway.
That was a good idea.
I learned
and it's still
from
a good
this
idea.
whole thing.
But then again, we're not Donald Trump. And the weird part of this, when you step back and look at it, you have to ask yourself, why did he do that when Murkowski, Collins, and Flake still have their minds to be made up? Oh. Or is it that they've already made up their minds and he knows?
Or does he think he can bribe them with some sort of federal projects or something like that? I'm sure he still thinks he has the juice to do that.
So we'll see how that plays out as well. But, it's, again, the other thing that somebody pointed out is for this huge story of the New York Times, which barely can be persuaded to say that Trump dissembled.
Yes.
Or Trump misspoke.
Right, they are.
Or Trump accidentally told an untruth. Then they came out and said this is tax evasion. And some of this is outright fraud, which gives you an idea of how solid it is. And it took 19 months to put together. Okay, so you have this solid story coming out, and here's Trump trying to divert people from that. And let's talk about Blasey Ford. I'm going to say a bunch of stuff you're going to pay attention to. Don't pay attention to the New York Times. And somebody just pointed out that's like the Trump presidency in a nutshell. Last night was like abbreviated pundit Trump.
Yeah. Well, I think that people will be concentrating on all sorts of things today, but it does illustrate the difficulty with it. Either one of these could have occupied
all the other
the whole
stuff,
day.
Like, I don't know, Bison being sent to the Pentagon and, that kind of thing doesn't even crack the attention of people.
We're used to that now.
Right. But those two stories, the Trump tax fraud story and the Kavanaugh story, which is going to have an endpoint at the end of the week, are going to be dominating the news cycle. So that's what I'm going to leave you with. I got to scoot off to work, but right. Joe McCarter's going to be here today, I hope.
That's my hope, unless she's busy evading taxes somewhere.
Say hi. She's always going to be McJoan to me, whatever she calls herself on Twitter.
Yeah, I don't know why she didn't go with that, but she was being transparent, I guess.
I suppose.
Supposed to value that.
Just like Barton Bread, it would have hid everything if she said McJoan.
Yeah. We'd all get it. Okay. Well, thanks very much, Greg. Today's Wednesday.
And I'll talk to you tomorrow. Yeah, today's Wednesday.
Exactly
Wednesday dance. And I'll see you tomorrow, and we'll see what happens on Thursday.
Okay. Thursday dance, I guess.
I suppose.
All right, they all look the same to me. Thanks very much, Greg. We will eagerly await the Thursday dance. Let's see. Karen, I hope you are satisfied, Karen. We did, I think, get a mention from Greg out of the New York Times piece. She's just pointing out, maybe worth mentioning, so it's always worth mentioning again, that the New York Times says that Trump acted with his siblings in this tax fraud, and one of his 3 surviving siblings is an inactive federal judge. Inactive? Is that right? Is she on senior status? Okay. Well, yes, we should all remember that that's the case. And I don't know, act appropriately, I guess. Joan, by the way, says that the reason she's not McJoan on Twitter is that someone had already grabbed that handle and was squatting on it. And also, she should be able to make it with us here on the air later on today. So fantastic. We'll look forward to that. And a little bit of background information on the availability of the McJoan handle. Okay, let's see. What are we going to do? Where should we go to? Just to head back to the Kavanaugh letter for a second. I guess this is as good a way as any to bring you the highlights of it without parsing through the article itself. I think at this point would probably be a waste of our valuable time. We'll have Hunter do it because we know he'll hit the highlights for us, as he did on the front page of Daily Kos yesterday. Kavanaugh Beach Week letter surfaces and it makes his Senate testimony look even worse. That's pretty much it. Yet another round of evidence has come out suggesting that would-be Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh sought to mislead the Senate in his testimony last week, this time in the form of a 1983 letter Kavanaugh wrote arranging a Beach Week condo rental. It's at this point almost just piling on, but among the tidbits written in Kavanaugh's own hand, the postscript joking that someone should warn the neighbors that we're loud, obnoxious drunks with prolific pukers among us. In Senate testimony, of course, Kavanaugh insisted that teen references to ralphing referred not to drinking, but supposedly to spicy food. And no, we're not making that up. But here, the projection of much vomiting at his Beach Week party is quite clearly tied to alcohol, so Kavanaugh appears to have lied. It was a stupid idea to come up with something like that anyway, but I don't know, we asked him to do it. And by the way, in terms of throwing crap at the wall and seeing what sticks, in all the stupid excuses that Kavanaugh gave for the codes in his yearbook entry, the New York Times reporting on this allows the F things to stand, which is amazing. The letter is, that's the third point here. The second bullet point in terms of highlights of the letter. This quote, I think we are unanimous that any girls we can beg to stay there, the condo, are welcomed with open, and then an ellipses. And that's the end of the sentence. This seems to go against Brett's image of himself as a teen entirely unoccupied with sex, if there's anyone on the planet who believed that in the first place. Third, the letter is signed FFFFF Bart. Kavanaugh told the Senate that these F's in his yearbook referred to a friend who stuttered when cursing, and in fact when drunk. This is not an instance of the FFFFF being used as a stutter, but seems far more in line with the extremely crude sexual reference that the term meant in every other social context in which it has been used. Yes, Kavanaugh really signed the letter Bart. When the Senate asked him whether references to a Bart O'Kavanaugh in close friend Mark Judge's autobiographical account of blackout high school drinking referred to him, Kavanaugh actually evaded the question. Kavanaugh did not offer the information that he, at the time, in actual letters, was using the nickname Bart himself. These would-be trivialities are consequential primarily because Kavanaugh has defended himself from accusations of multiple sexual assaults, with the insistence that he never, during the periods in question, drank to the point where such behavior would be possible. Instead, we have learned from numerous classmates that he was a belligerent, aggressive binge drinker who was likely too impaired to control or remember his actions on numerous occasions. His primary rebuttal to sexual assault allegations against him is clearly and demonstrably untrue. That is the problem right there. As opposed to, why, all kids are crazy in high school. Well, he's an adult now, and he can own up to it or not, and he chose not to. The New York Times also uncovered an underground high school newspaper written by friend Mark Judge, referring in crude terms to the supposed promiscuousness of Holton Arms girls. Kavanaugh suggested in his testimony that his school did not interact with theirs, another assertion disputed by multiple of his former classmates. In other significant news, 3 of Kavanaugh's own former law clerks, who signed a letter praising him to the Senate Judiciary Committee, have written a new letter stating that they are deeply troubled. It sounds like Susan Collins helped him with the letter. Deeply troubled by the allegations against him and encouraged by the initiation of a formal FBI investigation, which we believe is warranted, even if it's not actually going on in any manner worth discussing. But, well, we'll see. Maybe the report will be damning and we'll all be surprised by that. I'm not sure. But we should point out, by the way, it's no small thing, one, for anybody to retract a letter of endorsement like that. And it's not entirely clear that it is a retraction. Both the initial letter and the follow-up letter are actually both sort of vague, non-position taking and weird. But we understand what they were doing. They're in a delicate position, and they wanted to express something that could be interpreted as support at the time when these allegations had yet to surface. And now they feel like, and what's expressed in their letter is, we don't like the idea that people are taking a letter we wrote before these allegations were made publicly and claiming that we still support him despite the allegations. And all they really say in the letter is that they do sort of kind of still support him. It's just they have grave doubts about whether or not that's wise given the new allegations. And it is, I mean, they could have ignored the whole thing and not spoken out. So it's clear that they do have serious reservations, but they're not expressed all that clearly. But again, these are people still on the make, essentially, which only makes the letter that much more remarkable. These are people who clerked for Kavanaugh, and he's on the cusp of becoming a Supreme Court justice. And though they didn't clerk for him when he was on the Supreme Court, there's a certain amount of additional cachet, some prestige that will be, in a way, artificially lent to their resumes should he make it to the Supreme Court. In other words, although you very rarely will you want to imply that much more than is really warranted by doing this, especially at the very beginning of the guy's career on the Supreme Court, if he actually makes it, because everyone will know exactly what you're doing. But in other words, you get to say, yes, part of my fantastic resume, I clerked for Justice Kavanaugh. Now, I clerked for him when he was on the D.C. Circuit, which also is no small thing and a terrific accomplishment and well worth having on your resume. All of that is still true. But you get to create the ambiguity in later years anyway. Maybe you did clerk for the Supreme Court. And some of these people probably did go on to clerk for the Supreme Court justices in later days. But it's a big gold star on your resume to have clerked for someone who even made it, no matter when you clerked for them. And so to do something that might prevent him from making it to the court and adding that gold star to their resume is pretty serious. On the other hand, I mean, there's also this also reflects the reality that he's going to, if he makes it there, he'll make it there with an asterisk. The gold star becomes something of a brown smear instead. And every time you put your biggest selling point on your resume, and it now raises eyebrows. Like you show up and you say you clerked for Brett Kavanaugh, people will look at you funny. Now, that was what was supposed to happen, by the way, for people who were later saying that they clerked for Clarence Thomas, but I don't think it has worked out that way. Making it successfully onto the Supreme Court for the rest of your life has a way of overcoming that, at least in Thomas's case. And it's not because he's proved a capable jurist since then. It's that people lose interest and stop caring. And the longer the person serves on the court, the less the stain that goes along with serving as their clerk. It's just sort of one of the dynamics that we have out there that you should be aware of. Okay, let's see. How do we even handle the rest of the day at this point? I am not sure. It's not... We're never going to read through all of this Donald Trump piece, certainly not today, although, honestly, I feel like we ought to at some point and then just break it up into installments. If you haven't read it, there are lots of good executive summaries like David K. Johnston's out there, but suffice to say, Fred Trump, the senior Fred Trump, really was inventive and criminal in the way he manipulated his money and avoided estate taxes. And on top of all of that, not only is Donald Trump himself complicit in all of that because he helped participate. He participated in ways that made these schemes possible. But the article is also very clear that he's a horrible businessman and that despite the fact that he has built for himself this myth of being a successful businessman, and in fact, super successful, the kind of person who sees everything that he touches turn to gold, it has in fact been the opposite. And it is only the fact that his dad had a giant pile of money and was willing to burn it all in support of building this myth for his son for whatever reason. And maybe it was Kennedy family-like ambition to actually see his son become president one day. I don't know whether he envisioned that or not, but they've played their hand very much the same way and used all their money to pretend that Donald Trump knew what he was doing. I don't know why they thought that was a good investment. I'd be curious whether any of his siblings thought that was a good investment. And this is a good question for them because, as it turns out, Fred Trump started out trying to sort of evenly divide his vast fortune among his children. And as Donald continued to fail worse and worse, he spent more and more of that money on Donald that should have gone elsewhere. He had a huge fortune to distribute, and he gave about 80% of it to Donald Trump, and Donald Trump lost about, I don't know, let's take a stab at 60% of that money along the way because he doesn't know what he's doing and has no accountability whatsoever for any of the things he does. Anything he screwed up, his dad would pay for. And eventually, and this is a smart thing I did see, I think I saw David Frum pointing out that another Twitter favorite, and now I can't put my finger on it, but maybe I can dig it up here while we're speaking. But another Twitter favorite pointing out, this does raise a good question. At some point, Fred Trump dies. We know this to be the case. He is dead now. And but somebody else then has to take over the role of bailing out Donald Trump every time another one of his stupid ideas falls apart and he loses all his money. And the question is, who is that person or entity? Who takes over the job of bailing out Trump? And the point of this question is, of course, for you to draw the conclusion that it was, well, in some cases, Russian mobsters or Deutsche Bank or the same thing. However you slice it, it comes from the same quarters. Somebody else with their own interests in mind had to have taken over the role of bailing this guy out. And it's a good question. Who is it? Here we are. David Frum asking it this way and saying it's a sharp point from Asha Rangappa. I told you it was a Twitter favorite. Former FBI special agent, lawyer, and faculty, it says here, at Jackson, Yale. I'm not even certain what I'm looking at here. CNN analyst and all sorts of other things. But you've likely run into her on Twitter. Sharp point, he says, from Asha Rangappa. Fred Trump died in 1999. Who then inherited the job of bailing out Donald Trump from his catastrophic business decisions? You guessed it. It's probably Russia. Anyway, let's see. Many other things here today. Oh, by the way, just to bring things back to our own themes here on the show. First thing I thought of, basically, yesterday when we found out that, or when we saw the publication of the big New York Times piece, reminder that, as Michael Musson put it here, and he's usually commenting to us about what's going on in the show, he says the real Pulitzer will come if someone is able to dig up a genuine instance where Trump made money. He apparently only has any money now because he started with even more and didn't, I guess, get the chance to burn it all before he was elected president. Now, I just wanted to use that as the opportunity to remind everybody that this observation and this story from the New York Times that lays everything bare, this is why the editor's first cut of The Apprentice was cast as comedy. It was a tragic, tragic comic. That's the way they usually meld those words together. Tragic comic farce about an over-the-top, blustering, blowhard idiot that considered himself a, Midas touch businessman, but in fact was just a complete joke. And they were casting him in this reality show and putting him in charge of the cast of a bunch of idiotic characters who likewise didn't know anything about business, and they were going to get this hilarious show out of it. However, Mark Burnett, the producer, eventually overruled the editors, who wasn't that they made a conscious decision to do this. They were just looking at the material they had. You'll remember the article that we had about this. Editing Trump, the making of a reality TV star who would be president, right? And the editors saying their first cut at the thing, having a look at the footage that they got, footage that was filmed, that was handed over to them, suggested only one possible approach to the whole thing. This has to be a comedy about this idiotic guy. But Burnett, and I guess he was right about this, thought he would only have a hit if they cast it as a reality show about somebody who really was a businessman, and just basically said, go back to the drawing board and edit this thing to make him look like he knows what he's doing. And that's what they did, and the rest, I guess, is history. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see, where to go next? Well, there's any number of ways to approach this. Let me throw this one in here just to lay down the marker about how bad Republicans are at humanity, I guess we could say. Josh Marshall taking the time to note that yesterday Judiciary Committee Republicans passed on a letter that they got from basically a random guy who claimed that he once went out with Julie Swetnick, one of the Kavanaugh accusers, and the one who says that she herself fell victim to a gang rape, essentially, at one of the various parties at which the Kavanaugh crowd was in attendance. And the claim was that Kavanaugh himself was there, though she made no claim that he had participated directly in this assault, just that he was there. Anyway, some random guy who, I don't know, he has a certain claim to fame in the D.C. area, I guess, if you care to cast it that way. I believe he was a meteorologist on one of the local news channels, or the news broadcaster, I think the ABC affiliate in Washington, D.C. And he says he met Julie Swetnick at some point, and he just wanted the committee to know that they were considering dating, but Julie told him, hey, I'm really into having sex with multiple partners at the same time, and this bothered him enough to say, I'd rather not enter into a relationship, and I guess was deeply meaningful enough for him to say, I'm going to write to the Senate Judiciary Committee. I think it's important that they know that one of Kavanaugh's accusers has an interesting sexual proclivity, and I thought I would share that with you, and the responsibility of the adults at the Senate Judiciary Committee's Republican staff, who then blasted this letter out and shared it with the press because a random guy said that this was the case. And Josh Marshall making the point, yeah, this is actual Judiciary Republicans, not Breitbart, running with this. That was really rather amazing that story. The random guy, do we care what the guy's name is? I mean, he's semi-famous from Washington, D.C., a former weatherman for the local station WJLA, Dennis Ketterer, who basically starts off his story saying, "Oh, I thought Julie Swetnick was a prostitute because she talked to me and I weighed 350 pounds at the time. I had, I guess, low self-esteem, and I figured that only a prostitute would be talking to me. But it turned out she wasn't a prostitute. She was just a whore," was basically what he was trying to say in all this. And I don't know whether it's true. I don't know whether Julie Swetnick agrees. I don't know whether she cares. I don't know whether we're supposed to care. I don't know whether it's really true and that maybe it's only true because of some strange psychological, I don't know what, fallout from her having been assaulted by multiple boys, essentially, at these parties. I don't know. I don't know where to make the connection or if to make the connection. To me, the only thing I'm sure of is, what in the world did the so-called grown-ups at the Senate Judiciary Republican staff office think they were doing sharing this letter? I mean, I don't know what to say about that. But okay, there it is. And I guess they probably feel justified because something, and their guy is in trouble. And so something else. And people said some other stuff about sex. So it's only fair, I guess. Even though I don't think Julie Swetnick has been nominated to any public office, let alone to the Supreme Court. But I just thought we ought to note that and just put it in your outrage file and say this, among other things, is the reason I believe that everybody serving in the Trump administration and in Congress as a Republican or as staffer to a Republican ought to be drawn and quartered. Let's say that's the way you viewed it. All right, a couple other things here. Lots of good other summaries, by the way, about, in case you just figure you're never, ever, ever going to get to the New York Times piece. The New York Times did have a companion piece that they boiled down to under the headline. They boiled down to this headline: 11 takeaways from the Times' investigation into Trump's wealth. And I'll share that one with you guys too, even though I probably will not be reading through it. A few more things I wanted to get to and put on the table for discussion. One other semi-separate issue. Remember the emoluments clause of the Constitution. There are two, of course, foreign and domestic emoluments clauses. Just wanted to let you know that heard a story the other day. The lawsuits, at least one of the lawsuits or combination of some of the lawsuits, have been filed over the emoluments clause, continue on. And we've noted that in a couple of shows in the past. This one, this new development, reported this way over at law.com. In case you don't know what they report on, it's law. It's actually the National Law Journal at law.com. There were other sources for it, but everyone loves simplicity. Law.com is the way to go with this. And this one, Congressional Democrats emoluments suit. Had you forgotten about this one? I knew that there were a couple of other suits out there, but they are suing and they have cleared a standing hurdle. It is reported this way. Oops. They're going to make it difficult on me by throwing a paywall up at the last second. Well, I think we can get around that, even though it's good to pay people for content. Let's see. Democratic members of Congress, it says, have standing to sue President Donald Trump. I might not have guessed this was the case. For allegedly violating the Foreign Emoluments Clause. A federal judge in Washington, D.C. ruled last Friday afternoon in a court win that clears a significant hurdle for the lawmakers. The plaintiffs in Blumenthal v. Trump, 201 members of Congress in total, will be able to proceed with their suit after U.S. District Judge Emmett Sullivan of the District of Columbia denied, in part, Trump's bid to dismiss the case for lack of standing. He's really good at getting things done, or whatever this dotard is. Plaintiffs adequately allege that the president has completely nullified their votes in the past because he has accepted prohibited foreign emoluments as though Congress had provided its consent, Sullivan wrote This is sort of an interesting theory here. I'm not certain I love this theory, and he will completely nullify their votes in the future for the same reason, as plaintiffs allege that he intends to continue this practice. In other words, you should be reminded that we are talking about the clause reads such that it's not entirely or automatically or in every case unconstitutional for the president to accept foreign emoluments. It merely says, and it's been taken seriously up until now, that if the president were to accept such emoluments, it could be essentially legalized by gaining the consent of Congress to do so. Congress could, in its wisdom, decide that this or that emolument was really actually a pretty good idea if they wanted to, and grant him the opportunity to accept them. But it hasn't done so, and these members of Congress say that this past behavior and expected future behavior nullifies their votes as outlined in the Constitution. They should be being asked to ratify these things, and he's blowing right past them. I'm not so sure it's that solid a basis, but that's what the judge says now. The group of congressional Democrats represented by Brianne Gorod and Elizabeth Wydra of the Constitutional Accountability Center began its lawsuit against Trump last year, alleging that the president had violated one of the Constitution's anti-corruption clauses by continuing to accept foreign gifts and benefits through his businesses, including hotels and golf courses. They argued that because Trump, who continues to hold interests in and profits from his vast business empire, if he has one, has accepted foreign emoluments, he has denied members of Congress their individual rights to vote on each emolument. The Constitution's Foreign Emoluments Clause requires the president get congressional consent before accepting such gifts. U.S. Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, lead plaintiff in the case, called Friday's ruling a major breakthrough. It enables us to hold the president accountable for taking huge payments, benefits, and gifts from foreign governments or powers, and that is a violation of the chief anti-corruption provision of the Constitution, Blumenthal said. Jerry Nadler, congressman of New York, the other lead plaintiff on the case, Sullivan deferred ruling on 3 additional grounds for dismissal advanced by the U.S. Department of Justice lawyers who represent the Trump administration. One of the questions Sullivan must grapple with next includes the definition of an emolument. Still, Friday's ruling was a boost for the plaintiffs on a threshold issue. In court papers and during oral arguments in June, the Justice Department had contended that the court lacked jurisdiction to review the claims by the plaintiffs. The lawmakers, the U.S. argued, had not established sufficient injury. But Sullivan was not persuaded to dismiss the suit for lack of standing. He found on Friday that the plaintiffs adequately alleged an injury the courts could redress. He acknowledged the case raised the separation of powers question, but plaintiffs have no adequate legislative remedy, and the courts could resolve the matter. He wrote, the president's alleged acceptance of prohibited foreign emoluments as though Congress provided consent is indistinguishable from treating a vote that did not pass as if it had, or vice versa. Sullivan's 58-page opinion read, as soon as the president accepts a prohibited foreign emolument without obtaining congressional consent, his acceptance is irreversible. The president's relationship with his businesses has been at the center of 2 other major emoluments-related lawsuits in addition to the Blumenthal case. In July, a federal judge in Maryland gave a green light to an emoluments lawsuit brought by a pair of state attorneys general, rejecting a narrow interpretation of the term emoluments. And that story also linked herein. I don't know, again, how strongly I think this stands up. It's a bit of a stretch, I think, to say that his acceptance of prohibited foreign emoluments is indistinguishable from treating a vote that had taken place and had passed as if that doesn't strike me as particularly solid reasoning, let's say. I mean, they have the opportunity to hold such a vote. Nothing has prohibited anyone from submitting a resolution of disapproval, for instance. But I guess if it hinges on the illegality, the unconstitutionality, if that hinges on there having to be permission beforehand, then I guess you've got a case. If he's not allowed to accept an emolument that hasn't been pre-cleared by Congress, I don't know that I would necessarily agree with that interpretation, and I don't know that I would agree that it's irreversible. If it's cash or something with some cash value, I suppose that cash or the value of the cash value of the item could be expunged at some point, and you could force the president to pay the United States that money with interest, I guess, since we're talking about the time value of money. Speaking of time value, we have Joan McCarter now joining us. Good morning, Joan. We'll just get right to it because it's been a while since we've spoken, so we're glad to have you back. Trump is a crook. I don't know if you want to talk about that. But,
Trump is really a crook.
Yeah, he really...
This would have been a really fun thing for the New York Times to have been spending its time on instead of Clinton cash.
Yes, that's true.
2 years ago.
Rather amazing that they were sold on the complete opposite, and then failing the Clinton cash thing, they thought maybe the emails would be more interesting to people than the fact that, or as LOL GOP put it this morning, and I guess it's actually true, that Trump has been robbing the troops since birth, essentially. This is tax money. We know where that goes. And those poor veterans who have been so ill-served by a lack of care and the United States breaking faith with them so often and taking care of them in exchange for their service. One of his favorite applause lines, well, a lot of that care could have been paid for by money that Trump instead used to buy gold toilets for himself and a number of other things. And, I just wonder whether anybody might want to make him pay for that. I have my doubts, and certainly the Republican position is, we had our accountability moment. People decided they would rather let Trump have gold toilets than pay for veterans' care. And that's that. That's what our Constitution says. So we'll see whether that's the case. And I guess we'll see whether state and I guess federal tax authorities are interested in pursuing the not time-limited civil penalties for all this, which will, of course, only, I assume, lead him to conclude, see, I'm not criminal. Just like
I do believe state tax authorities are. I think they're already looking into it.
Yes. Well, not if Orrin Hatch has anything to say about it. He's going to eliminate their ability to try him for the same crimes because federalism.
Indeed. Indeed. There's an awful lot riding on Brett Kavanaugh getting to the Supreme Court.
That's what I'm told. And so I guess that's why people are taking these inexplicable positions and insisting that, things like all the goofy codes that he put in his yearbook are really about how often he liked to go to church or something like that.
Yes.
Yes. Most kids were into that.
Marcos has a post on that coming up.
Oh, yeah?
Okay. For everybody to know, because it's always fun when Marcos writes.
Yeah, I guess so. He's been inspired by this. Well, is he
and
done
Marcos
with it?
is the one person who can write on the front page of Daily Kos what all of these euphemisms actually mean.
Yeah, there are some of them that people would, I think, naturally be reluctant. But I guess he's not. Or else he thinks, there is some news value to knowing what people are whispering about, I guess.
I guess.
But yeah, we'll put it out there bluntly for you instead of dancing around it.
Yes.
Okay.
I have a hard time with the bluntness part of it.
Some of them are really disturbing. I mean, that's the real part. None of us are afraid of a little bit of cursing or even an off-color remark here and there, I guess, though we're more and more sensitive, rightly, to what they mean to others. But, I mean, this is like deep-seated, hardcore, misogynistic stuff that's meant to offend. And if you have to explain to people, how bad was he? Well, you're going to have to put on a helmet and warn people off. Look, if you're fine with just not knowing, that's okay. But, wow.
Yeah, I mean, definitely trigger warning on this stuff.
Yeah.
But,
yeah. So, okay, duly warned. It'll be out there, and I guess if you still have questions about how many Fs are there in that, or why are there so many, I guess you'll find out. Or you can Google it ahead of time, because it's a real thing.
Yeah.
You know,
It's yeah,
Marco's not
none of
making it
this
up.
is drinking games. None of
no,
it.
That's really true. And yeah, I saw somebody had a rather brilliant observation of that on Twitter the other day. That the idea that I had never heard the term Devil's Triangle anyway, and it sounds rather stupid to me. Anyhow, as a term or a euphemism or a code, it's a dumb one. But he claimed that it was a drinking game, which also maybe is something that 17-year-olds shouldn't be talking about in their yearbook, but they did. And somebody,
What kind of yearbook was this, by the way?
I don't know. They must have had like blind editors or something. And I don't really know. I thought they were a Catholic school, and you'd think that there would have been some faculty oversight of these things, but I assume that, I don't know. I mean, they couldn't have missed the keg thing, but maybe, I don't know, back in the day, the priests were drinkers too. I got no idea, but how they could miss the rest of it might have just been, we're too old to understand what they're talking about. I don't know.
Maybe they just had no faculty supervision.
That could be it. We trust our students to put whatever they want in the yearbook. That was kind of dumb. But some of the things that they put in there, and the Devil's Triangle thing, and him claiming it's a drinking game, somebody had said, if you believe Brett Kavanaugh and you've got daughters in college, why don't you tell them to run into the nearest fraternity house and shout, "Hey, anybody want to play Devil's Triangle?" and let her see what happens.
Have you seen the Urban Dictionary's definition now?
Oh, yeah, that it's been modified.
Definitely not a drinking game that involves lining up glasses in a triangle and bouncing quarters into them. That game is called Quarters.
That's an
Most
easier
likely
name for
popular activity with certain Georgetown prep boys in the 1980s. Used in a sentence. Did you hear Brett Kavanaugh's bullshit explanation for what Devil's Triangle means? Yep. You must think no one has access to Google.
That's pretty good. I know for a while, I didn't see that last one. The one I had heard was that somebody had modified the definition to say, "Oh no, it's a drinking game," just like Brett Kavanaugh says, which was of course the giveaway.
Yeah.
Why they didn't just leave it as a popular drinking game of the 1980s? No one would have believed it, but I would have just left
invented
it that way.
by Brett Kavanaugh during Senate hearings. Yeah, there's a lot of new ones. Yeah.
I guess so. Man, all right. Well, I never. That's another one that I never played with 3 cups, but I suppose you could come up with that. And I don't know. It's one of several incredibly dumb things. I guess stacked up, or maybe exceeded in its weirdness only by the fact that Brett Kavanaugh keeps some weird records. What is he doing? Yeah. I understand the calendar thing.
And I guess, it's a good thing he kept the calendar. It's weird.
He thinks it is, and so do I.
But
for different reasons.
The calendar's not particularly exonerating.
It doesn't appear to be, and it's just weird. I understand keeping a calendar, meaning like contemporaneously. I love this word, contemporaneous. Yes. And I understand keeping it then, like I need to know what I'm doing right now, or even I need to know what I did last week. The idea of keeping my 1982 and 1983 calendars until now, I don't know. I find that unusual, to say the least. And this letter, do you know the provenance of the letter, where this came from? Who got it, and
how the New York Times got it? I don't know. I don't know. Somebody had I can't remember which Twitter person I follow. How do you communicate to a whole group of people with a letter? Like, did he nail it onto the clubhouse door? This smarter person than me on Twitter asked. How did he photocopy it and hand it out?
I don't know. That is an interesting question. This is not the days of email. This is a written communication, and you can't just CC everybody. I mean, I guess you could have written that at the end and hoped that you were sending it to a good friend, 17-year-old friend with a secretary who could have this distribution taken care of. Interoffice memo. I don't know. Put it on the bulletin board near the water cooler. He could have photocopied it and sent it to everybody, but I don't know what to tell you.
I don't know either.
That's a weird thing.
I'm running out of things to say about this because it's just baffling that we're still in the middle of this.
Yes.
That McConnell hasn't said, okay, enough. Is it McConnell's darned stubbornness that has just said, we're going to do this no matter what, here we go?
And
is
I
it
can't
Trump?
Tell. Well, it can't be Trump, I don't think, because I still don't believe that McConnell just says, without a different, without a different motivation, a hidden motivation, saying, I'm doing this because Trump said to. I'm so afraid of Trump. Although I do credit the possibility that he's doing it this way, that McConnell is saying, well, Trump says he wants his vote. I'll show you, Trump. We'll have it. I told you Kavanaugh wasn't going to make it. We'll have the floor vote, and you're going to look like an idiot. And some people will blame me, and I don't really care. I have the ears of people I can blame it on you with.
Oh, that's in keeping with McConnell, I suppose.
It could be. Otherwise, I just don't. Otherwise, he might think I can get this done. We can win. But then again, I don't know why he would be delaying. And it's clear that he may think he can eventually twist enough arms, but he hasn't finished his work yet. Otherwise, he would have done it.
He's got Collins somehow. And I don't know if he can keep her, but somehow he has Collins.
Yes, to date, that appears to be the case. Last couple hours, I guess, really, last day or so, I guess all the papers in Maine have come out against him. I don't know how
all the papers in Maine.
Yeah.
And all of the polling in Maine. I just finished writing this up. PPP did a poll and tweeted at Joe Sudbay more results from it, saying in a hypothetical 2020 reelect, she leads a generic Dem by 8 points. But if she votes to confirm Kavanaugh, that becomes a tie. Moves from trailing only 53-26 with Clinton voters to 80-9 based on a vote to confirm Kavanaugh.
Okay.
This is career defining.
Yeah.
And, he's underwater with all Maine voters, according to 3 different polls. She's dropped from 67% approval last October, to 49% approval in August, and it's probably lower now. I haven't seen a straight up approval of Collins. People in Maine really, really do not want her to vote for Kavanaugh.
Yeah.
And the chances that a Republican can primary her on this 2 years from now, with all of whatever water is under the bridge, based just on this vote, she's going to be primaried anyway. Does this still have that much weight 2 years from now for Republicans if she votes no, as opposed to the intense hatred and motivation that is galvanizing among independents, among Republican women who have voted for her in the past, among Democratic women who voted for her in the past? She's lost all of that.
Yeah.
And is unlikely to get it back. She can salvage part of it, probably, if she votes no on him. But, this morning, they asked her about Trump's just horrific display last night, mocking Ford. She said the president's comments were just plain wrong. That's all she could muster.
Okay.
Which is slightly better than Jeff Flake's. What was Jeff Flake's?
He was kind of
disappointing.
I'm not mad. I'm disappointed.
Yeah.
Essentially. Okay. Well, yeah. Even
kind of appalling is what Jeff Flake said.
Kind of. Sort of. A little bit.
A little bit.
I mean, all right. He is who he is. Clearly, even Collins. I mean, it's only slightly better, I suppose, that Collins says, just plain wrong. I mean, that can be taken as a blanket disapproval, or I guess it could also be taken as a, well, kind of.
What she didn't say and wouldn't comment on was whether it's going to affect her vote.
Oh, right. She was never going to own up to that. That's clearly the case. I hope she's thinking about it, though. All right, well, we're bumped up against one more break. That'll give us a chance to organize our thoughts and then abandon those thoughts by the time we come back from the break on what to do with the rest of our segment. Hang on just 2 minutes, and we'll be back with more from Joan McCarter. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Joan McCarter is still with us. We've been puzzling over what interesting and new angles to take on the fact that the biggest stories of the day continue to be Bart O'Kavanaugh and Donald Trump being a massive, gigantic fraud and con man. There's no way to get through all the story of Trump and all that, but we'll be enjoying bits and pieces of that, I think, for a couple of weeks. Same with Kavanaugh. But I know that's occupied most of your time lately, and there are probably a couple of additional observations on smaller moving parts in the Kavanaugh story that we have missed that might have occurred to you to share with us in the last segment. I know you mentioned
one thing that's curious is how closely Flake has aligned himself with Chris Coons.
Yeah. Okay.
They were back on network TV again this morning. It's like he's using Coons as his human shield or something.
Well, it's got to be difficult for him being out in public now.
Coons has remained opposed to Kavanaugh. I don't think anything's going to be changing there. And hopefully he's having some influence on Flake. Hopefully this means Flake is listening and ready to do the right thing.
I hope so, but it's so hard to believe in Flake these days, given how often he's flaked on things. I mean,
has any politician ever been more aptly named?
Yeah. And I mean, it may just be that he's a really good actor. I don't know what it is, but he did look genuinely troubled that day last week, especially when confronted in the elevator. Other senators happily just closed the doors on people and said bye.
Oh yeah,
and this
Bob
was
Corker
bothering
yesterday. Him. Did you see him?
Who did?
A couple of activists, sexual assault survivors and activists have been staking out airports.
Yes,
staking out D.C. National to talk to these folks as they come in. And Corker actually said, I know this is fun for you guys.
Oh. Yeah.
I know this is fun for you.
It's a huge pastime. Everyone loves talking about their
sexual assault with a old white man, Republican.
Yeah. So I guess he
so, to Flake's credit, it did move him.
Yeah. Or at least he was willing to play the role correctly and look like somebody who was at least possibly empathetic, as opposed to sneering and laughing about this whole thing, which I guess brings us to the point.
The rest of the Republican Party.
Yeah. And including all the way up the ranks to the top. The president at yet another rally, his 479th rally, I think, this week. And he couldn't have illustrated the point better than by taking up the microphone to mock Christina Blasey Ford, and to do it, in his rally style where he loves the same setup, people behind him. It's never just him up there solo, which is
Egging him
interesting.
on, laughing.
Yeah.
Those white men behind him laughing.
Which is, of course, exactly the problem with the assault she suffered the first time. She said that the lasting, most painful part of it was the
indelible memory.
The man in power doing this to her, abusing her to the laughter, the uproarious laughter of his audience. So, of course, that's what Trump goes and does. And his staff now professes to be shocked that he has abandoned his restraint that he was so successful in exercising over the past couple of days.
I'm sure in a couple of days Ivanka will have many remorseful things to say about that.
Yes, she's very upset. She's privately appalled, I'm sure. Even though we watched her husband laugh at the journalists that Trump was belittling the other day, the women journalists, in the middle of the Rose Garden. Nobody seemed to enjoy that quite as much as Jared Kushner did, with possible exception of Steve Mnuchin and his transitions lenses.
Yes.
But
looking like a cheap cartoon villain.
It was pretty funny. But ultraviolet light is no joke. Ladies and gentlemen, take care of your eyes. Okay. Just saying. But let's see.
McConnell's expected to file a cloture vote today.
File today. Okay, so that gives us the chance to see a vote sometime late tomorrow to early Friday, I guess, depending on when he files. What do we need? A full 24-hour calendar day, just to remind you all of the rules, as if there were any. Full 24-hour calendar day has to pass in between the date on which cloture is filed and the day on which you vote on that cloture motion. So if he files today, Thursday is out, and Friday, as early as 1 a.m., or 12:59, 12:01, I guess, a.m. on Friday, you could have the cloture vote. And then, of course, 30 hours of post-cloture debate because somebody made a mistake in enrolling the rules back in the 1800s or whatever. And though you cannot amend an appointment or a nomination, 30 hours must elapse unless there is unanimous consent to do away with it, or you say, well, that's not the rules anymore, so we're done. Which, look, people can do these things.
I can't imagine
there's no reason
any Democrat allowing unanimous consent on this one.
No, I should hope not, unless there's, they got a squash game to get to or something. Something important. Columbus Day is coming, and they want to insult the Native American population sooner.
Also, what would take is Susan Collins and Jeff Flake to say, no.
Yeah. Right.
Right now, they could stop this whole farce.
Yes, that's true.
Because I'm pretty darned sure Lisa Murkowski's already there.
I hope so. That would be nice. She also plays the role better.
Her comments that I heard Greg mention earlier on the Senate subway when McConnell was calling for a vote, and she said, he said that last week.
Yeah.
She's also made a point of saying that this vote has galvanized people in Alaska like nothing else. That she's getting, let's see if I can find the exact. It says the volume of calls from Alaskans on Kavanaugh is unprecedented. Deluge is larger than before healthcare. All the voicemail boxes are literally filled within the first hour, she says.
Wow.
So
there's not a lot of Alaskans.
She's been setting herself up to vote no on this for weeks, and I think that she is definitely there.
I hope so.
It just feels like it.
She certainly plays the role more convincingly than Collins has ever been able to do it. And,
she's
Oscars.
lined everybody up. She's got the statewide office holders in Alaska saying no. She's got the Alaska Native community all saying no and backing her up and keeping the pressure on. Whether she actually was the machine behind this, I don't know, but it feels like it.
Okay. Well, I
Feels
would
like she
happily
has
credit
set
her for that.
everybody up to support her when she votes no. And of course, if Collins votes yes, Flake votes yes, they can lose her.
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't have to.
Right.
That's just the way it feels right now.
I get the same feeling, and of course, if she is the machinery that set all that in motion, then that would explain her being a senator at this point. I mean, that's how you do these things. That's what you're supposed to do. When you have a tough vote coming and you know it, you make sure you have backing from back home. And I guess anybody who can organize a write-in campaign for Senate probably has a good Rolodex for setting that up when they need to.
Yes.
So, okay.
And, easy in Alaska. Small population.
True. And a hard thing to do with that population to fill the voicemail boxes every day in an hour.
Yes.
So they're working hard over there. They're happy to have telephone connections that allow them to call Washington, D.C. from the frozen wilderness of Alaska, I guess. They probably had those already, though. I underestimate their access to technology.
Yes, they even have flush toilets.
See, congratulations. So they've got their priorities straight.
Yes.
Okay. Well, it will be very interesting to see how this one works itself out. And, I guess so. Let's see. We've covered the mechanics of things. We'll likely see, as you said, filing for cloture. Doesn't matter what time it happens today.
Unless somebody privately goes to McConnell, somebody being Flake and Collins, and says,
I'm going to be
no. Let's just end this now. But McConnell seems intent on punishing people, so.
Yeah, we just don't know who. It may be that he wants to punish people who are going to be no's and say, if you're going to be a no, I don't care if I lose the vote. Well, I do, but if I'm going to lose the vote, I want everybody to see who made me lose it, and then we will punish you. Or he may say, look, I don't care what you do. I'm having this vote, and if we lose, I'm just going to put that on the president and say, oh, that's that. I guess we could also hold out there that if they really think they have something that they can use to bring back stray votes, losing the cloture vote isn't actually necessarily the end of everything, although I don't think I've ever seen a Supreme Court nominee lose a cloture vote and then have McConnell switch his vote and then bring it up for reconsideration later. I've never seen that for a Supreme Court nomination before. Could happen, but I can't think of any good reason to do it that way. But
because he enjoys prolonging this agony.
Yeah, it's like we don't have anything else to do, so
that's what it feels like.
We're going to reconsider this for a week, but I don't see nobody benefits from that I can think of. So it's likely to be the end.
It really is astonishing that we're still doing this. The Kavanaugh didn't get pulled already.
Yes, a normal presidency, you would have seen that over with a long time ago. And people are very interested in bringing up other examples of nominees for executive positions, not even lifetime judicial appointments, that Obama pulled the moment he found out somebody, didn't leave a big enough tip at a diner or something. Basically, you can't get away with that stuff. But you forget how much attention he paid to that kind of projection of an image of honesty, transparency, and anti-corruption. Hard to believe that there ever was such a president at this point.
It really is.
All right. Well, let's see. I don't know. I mean, maybe we've exhausted the topic at this point, but
I don't know what else there is to say other than why is McConnell just so into this? And is it because we have McConnell and needing protection from his part in the whole Russia collusion thing?
Yeah. Now, I saw that you mentioned this also, that this, I mean, this is not news per se. What was it that brought back into the news cycle. This 2016 episode.
A new book.
Okay.
From Greg Miller at the Washington Post, who has reported on how this all went down in the summer of 2016. He was reporting on it, not contemporaneously, because we didn't find out until December of that year, what was going on behind the scenes when the Obama administration was finding out that that Putin was behind efforts to elect Donald Trump, basically. And we've got Greg Miller out hawking his book. He was on CNN yesterday. And the clip that made the rounds on Twitter and made a splash was McConnell's interference in that. This is happening before the election, he says. Okay, so it's, I think, July of 2016. And the CIA has found out that it's Putin directly behind the interference. That this is happening, that they are specifically trying to get Trump elected. He says, Brennan sets in motion a series of private briefings with all congressional leaders. It's really an unusual, crazy moment in our history. He's trying to get their attention, trying to grab them by the collar. So he's meeting with McConnell, and McConnell is basically telling him, you're telling us that Russia is trying to help elect Trump. If you try to come forward with this, I'm not going to sign any sort of public statement that would condemn Russian interference. This is what he's telling Brennan. But I will condemn you and the Obama administration for trying to mess up this election.
Yeah. Well, that's something that, again, we had heard before, but I don't know, did we have this level of detail about what his comments actually were, or is that
we
not
did
new?
not.
Okay.
We did not. And this
That's
is apparently it devolved into sort of a shouting match between McConnell and Brennan and the Obama administration backed down.
Wow.
They were afraid, and maybe rightly so,
maybe
given the outcome of the election, that if they did push this, if they did make it public, and McConnell turned it into a huge partisan fight, that would only help Trump more.
You never know. But that does seem, it's rather amazing, and it always seems like, in the movies, it feels like the CIA wins out in these things and says, listen, you can do that, you can refuse to join the letter, and you can tell the press that we're the ones trying to make this partisan, but of course that will only open the door for our saying, of course Mitch McConnell says this is true, he's in on it with Putin.
Yeah.
And stands to benefit. And then in the movies, the guy goes, gulp, and then doesn't do it. But I don't know. I guess it doesn't work out that way in real life. Of course, no one tried.
Not with the Obama administration.
I guess not. Because I suppose at that point, McConnell would say, outrageous, you have no proof. And Democrats, being Democrats, would say, that may be right. We don't.
Yeah.
Okay, we better not. All right, well, roll the dice. Let's see what happens. We just uncovered a massive plot by the Russians to interfere in the election. I guess at that point they said, I wonder, at that point did they say we lost?
Putin
Oh, no.
wants Trump elected.
Yeah.
That's what they had.
And so they said, well, I guess we better just let him be elected then. And then everyone will realize how bad Putin is. I don't know what the strategy was, but I'm sure they were worried, they were fearful, and I guess at that point you have that discussion, and then somebody says, well, okay, but suppose he wants it, but it doesn't work, and Hillary wins as everyone expects, and there's also the storyline out there that, somehow this election wasn't conducted legitimately, and though the story is supposed to be that Putin was trying to get the other person elected. So what an amazing development.
Yeah, you can totally see McConnell coming out after the election if Hillary Clinton's elected saying Russia interfered, the Obama administration knew it and didn't do anything about it.
That would be rather
And look what
amazing.
happened. We've got Hillary.
And we did then we would have had, imagine, this is interesting now that you bring this up, he certainly not beyond McConnell to do something like that. I mean, he essentially just did that, but did it in private.
Yeah.
So would he go public with it? With a Republican Senate and a Republican House, and a Hillary Clinton presidency, which would upset him enormously. I don't see why he doesn't, and it just sort of occurred to me that you could have seen, what a scene you would have seen. Imagine the Fahrenheit 9/11 opening in reverse, and Republicans making this allegation that they need to stop the electoral vote count, but you can't have it happen unless a senator stands up. Well, gee whiz, can I find a Republican senator to stand up and object to the ratification of Hillary Clinton's election? Where will I find such a person? I have no idea. But imagine seeing that scene and having that play out again, and everybody saying, well, we know how this goes, except Republicans just say, hey, the hell with it. Yeah, I'll sign it.
Yeah.
Now what? That's a good point. Do you think that that's the sort of thing that would frighten, maybe that's not the right word, but concern Obama to enough that he would say, we may just have to roll the dice on this one and pray for the best possible outcome, or what? Well, where was our transparency then? They should have just said, the hell with it. He's not signing the letter, but it's true. So here we go.
Yeah.
Damn. I wish we had that whole thing.
I think probably that's the route Harry Reid wanted to take.
Yeah, you would think.
Looking at what Harry Reid did and said in the immediate aftermath of that meeting.
He basically did everything he could to just say it anyway.
Yeah.
And then, okay, well, that's bad, but I'm sure a tell-all memoir in the future will straighten and say that's not such a great
So,
behind.
it's a stretch, but what if McConnell wants Kavanaugh to protect his ass too?
Yeah, I guess so. There's not much else really recommending Kavanaugh other than his well, it's funny to say that his reliability is what we're really all interested in here on the Republican side. He's a huge serial liar and maybe possibly a drunk, but what we want is his reliability. Okay.
Uh-huh.
I guess that makes sense to someone somewhere. But all right, well, very, very strange. Amazing thought, though, that they to put that past Republicans to just simply nullify Hillary Clinton's election and say, well, we didn't make this process up. This was what Democrats tried to do to George W. Bush. And by the way, who was instrumental in helping avoid that whole thing from coming together? Brett Kavanaugh. So anyway, maybe he'll understand and be helpful to us.
Maybe he'll understand. And I think I'm going to have to move out a little bit soon.
That's fine. We need to find
I got a signal from not from the Bat Cave, but from Gotham City, from Barb.
Okay. Does she have a signal?
It shows me a tweet. U.S. Capitol Police is planning to move all media out of this hallway when Senator Collins departs the room she's in. Huh. This hallway is open to the public. We respect her safety, and we do this every day. Not sure why today is any different. Video explaining below. Anyway.
That's weird.
We may have something with Collins.
Okay. We'll go and find out what that is. And I think we've exhausted all the possibilities now without any new news to go with. But thank you. And thanks for coming by and puzzling it through with us. And,
you are most welcome.
Scaring the crap out of us with the reverse 9/11 thing now. Okay. Or maybe I did that to myself. I can't tell the difference anymore. Thank you, Joan.
Maybe we'll know more next week.
I guess so. And let's see, there won't be much. Is everybody going to be adjourned by next week, we assume?
Don't know.
Don't know. Still don't know. Okay. McConnell may keep them here. Is the house out? They're gone, aren't they?
The house is gone, yeah.
Okay, well, we don't do anything. Let's all leave. Out with a bang, Paul Ryan. You remember that big splash, that big crowning achievement on his way out the door? I can't remember what it was. Oh, nothing. That's right. Exploding debt and deficit. That must be it.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. We'll talk to you next week.
Done. Thanks very much, Joan. Talk to you then. And good luck with the story. And tell us, Barb should come up with some kind of a cool symbol for you to just flash in the skies over Idaho.
I get a ping on Slash.
Yeah. Same thing. Okay.
Yeah.
It's very similar.
All right.
Take care, Joan.
Slack, that is. All right. Bye-bye.
All right. Let's see. Where will we go to wrap up with these things? All right. Well, as you can see, we've kind of wrung every last drop out of waiting for the procedure in Congress to develop. We're just going to have to wait to see what McConnell is up to here. And there's simply no other remedy for it. We think we have a pretty good idea. Now I'm curious about what is so exciting about clearing a hallway for Senator Collins to leave. I wonder what news, if any, they think is changing the regular routine. All right. Nearly time to turn things over to Justice. Plenty more we probably should put on the record. Let's end with this. There was a tweet storm from our favorite Turkish-American journalist whose name we can only pray we get close to pronouncing correctly, Zeynep Tufekci, who has addressed this subject a number of times. Let's read through her tweet storm quickly. Foreign meddling, just to get the subject established quickly. Foreign meddling is real, but it's a symptom, not the actual illness. She's always got an interesting view of things. Our domestic polarization and how our public sphere operates. We're looking for ibuprofen to cure an infection. For a solution, focus, she says, less on Russia, more on the U.S. She's got a New York Times piece on this subject. And what she seems to be getting at here, since we're not going to have time to read the piece, maybe we can look at the rest of the tweets. In other words, America and Americans' political polarization set the table for the success of Russian meddling. Russia may have been interested in meddling in our elections regardless, but this is something we've actually touched on a little bit in the past too. It doesn't take a great deal of insight into the American mind, the American political mind, to figure out how to exploit divisions. And the Russians were pretty good at it, but really all they needed was to take the cues from Americans, to see that people were fighting over, for instance, Black Lives Matter, and that you could anger conservatives or possibly even guilt liberals in manipulating that message and perverting it and making it your own and doing it in a way that was disguised the fact that it was Russians doing it and pretending instead that it was Black Americans doing it. And that's just one example of how you could have found divisions that you could have exploited to divide and confuse Americans even without a presidential election. But she goes on to describe what's in her article, saying, I find the evidence of Russian meddling to be credible. She's not dismissing it. And so much of it happened in public. It might have had an impact given the close election, especially through hacked emails and also how media went along with that part. It's still not the correct focus to try to fix what ails us. I do not disagree, though the issue of the emails isn't totally disconnected from Russian meddling through hacked emails, which was then merged with just the emails subject. I wrote at length about how traditional media dropped the ball from before the election, not one or the other. And here's my piece once again from before the election, this time for what it's worth. Whenever I write about the digital side of our public sphere, people will say, what about traditional media? Well, yeah, it's rare that any problem worth worrying about is ever single causal, but there are differences. Facebook won't ever do what the New York Times did yesterday, for instance, a deeply reported piece alleging tax evasion by a sitting president. Facebook embeds staff with politicians, including Trump, to help them spend their money on Facebook. The New York Times put itself in the bullseye. I criticize mass media a lot, she continues. My book talks about how media ridiculed Occupy at first and how social media helped it break out. But it's not the same. Silicon Valley can succeed in ways that damage society. Traditional media fails in ways that damage society. But there's still a big difference. And there's a big difference that way. When Silicon Valley succeeds, it damages society. When traditional media fails, then you get the same result. And that is a very big difference in the way you can approach the damage you cause in society. All right, her piece, her current one, called Russian Meddling is a Symptom, Not the Disease, appears in today's New York Times. Perhaps we'll take a look at it and digest it a little bit tomorrow and the rest of the week. For now, time to hand the microphone over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Here's what he's got on tap. Lindsey Graham demands that Amy Klobuchar apologize to Brett Kavanaugh and calls all of the accusers liars. He's getting ready to cast the first stone, it appears. Then on the rest of his menu for the day, House Republicans attempts to brand U.S. environmental groups as foreign agents ensnares one of the nation's preeminent environmental law firms. A suspected rice-and-laced snail mail is sent to the U.S. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis.
From Daily Co's Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Oh, get this one. How about this? The first woman to win a physics Nobel Prize in over 50 years, Donna Strickland, recently denied a Wikipedia page because her references in scientific work did not meet Wikipedia's high standards to, quote, qualify for an article. I wonder what's driving that. Check that story out and more